Hi, welcome back. So in this chapter, we're going to cover the role of aging in personality. So we're going to discuss some key principles of trait theories. One important principle is the structure of traits. So a trait is any distinguishable, relatively enduring way that one individual differs from others. And traits are organized hierarchically within a person. So similar to intelligence, they're organized in a hierarchy. And this means that traits can be grouped and understood based on how related they are to one another. And we usually express this organization in dimensions, which are similar to factors that we see in measuring intelligence. And so according to Costa and McRae in 2011, there are three main assumptions we make about traits. One is that traits are assessed by comparing people, since there are no absolute standards for qualities such as friendliness. So there's this comparison between individuals. The second one is distinctiveness of traits. So the behaviors that make up a trait need to be clear and distinct. So for example, if friendliness and aggressiveness share too many behaviors, it would lead to confusion then about what each trait really means. And then lastly is the stability of traits. So we assume that traits are stable over time. So for example, if someone is friendly in several situations, then we would expect them to be friendly the next time we see them. And so all of these assumptions align with the classic definition of a trait, and understanding these principles helps us better grasp how personality traits function in our lives. One significant development in studying adult growth and aging is a personality theory that focuses on adults. And so there is a 5-factor model that we use that has 5 key dimensions to describe differences in traits and personality. And so these 5 dimensions are neuroticism, extroversion, openness to experience, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. So these are known as the big 5 traits, and they're supported by extensive research. They're very general, broad traits that each define a set of dimensions and facets. And so when we break each of these dimensions down, each of them has their own definition. So neuroticism is characterized by levels of anxiety, self-consciousness, or depression, and negative emotion. And so people high in neuroticism, they often feel anxious. They're often self-conscious, and they may struggle with negative emotions that affect their relationships and their daily life. In contrast, those that are low in this trait tend to be calm, stable, and content. And so they're able to better regulate their emotions, whereas those high that they find it more difficult to regulate negative emotion. Extroversion is characterized by social settings, so socializing, being outgoing, and often taking the lead in conversation. So those high in extroversion, they enjoy being around large groups of people. They get their energy from others, and they prefer active environments. Whereas someone who is low in extroversion, they're usually more reserved and serious, and they may prefer more one-on-one interactions with other people, and less preferring active environments where there is a lot of people around. And so that would be characterized by extroversion. Openness to experience, so individuals that score high in this area are typically very imaginative, they're curious, and they enjoy exploring new ideas and experiences. They often make choices based on their interests rather than strict rules. Those that are low in this trait tend to be practical and conventional, and they really prefer to stick to their routines. Agreeableness is linked to being friendly, cooperative, and caring towards others. So people that would score high in agreeableness, they often tend to be very cooperative in job settings. They work well with others. They are a team player, In contrast, those low may be more irritable or unkind, and they can sometimes say or do hurtful things. They tend to not work well in groups and be cooperative. They tend to work better alone. Conscientiousness is characterized by being hardworking, organized, and reliable. And so people that score high in this trait are often hardworking and they often have achievements and they set goals for themselves and they often achieve them. Those that are low in this trait may struggle with planning and following through on commitments, and they may take more risks. So these 5 dimensions can help us understand how adults differ in their personalities and behaviors. So as I mentioned earlier, these traits are broken down into facets. So neuroticism has 6 facets characterized by anxiety, hostility, self-consciousness, depression, impulsiveness, and vulnerability. Extroversion has 6 facets in 2 groups. So there's interpersonal traits of warmth, gregariousness, and assertiveness. And then there's temperamental traits, which are activity, excitement seeking, and positive emotions. And so with openness to experience, that has 6 facets. So this is characterized by fantasy, aesthetics, action, ideas, values, and occupational choice. Agreeableness is the opposite of antagonism. And so agreeable people are generally not skeptical, mistrustful, callous, unsympathetic, stubborn, rude, skillful manipulators, or aggressive go-getters. And so we would use these facets to determine how high on agreeableness somebody was. And so if they score high on all of these facets, then they would be low in agreeableness. So conscientiousness also has several facets, such as being hardworking, ambitious, energetic, scrupulous, persevering, and desirous to make something of themselves. And so we would characterize people that score high in these dimensions as high in conscientiousness, whereas if they score low in being hardworking, ambitious, energetic, etc., they would be low in conscientiousness. Cosa and McGray studied whether personality traits stay the same as people get older. They believe that by around age 30, these traits stop changing and become set. And their research based on the Baltimore longitudinal study of aging involved 114 men who took the Guilford-Zimmerman temperament survey 3 times over 12 years. And surprisingly, they found that 10 traits that were measured remained very stable with strong correlations between scores. We usually expect traits to stay stable over a short time, but seeing this over 12 years is pretty significant. They also observed stability in other studies conducted over different time frames from 7 to 30 years, suggesting that personality traits don't change much from ages 20 to 90. However, there are some changes that can occur. So there was a large study that combined 16 research studies with around 60,000 subjects, and the study results showed that traits can decline in certain areas. For example, conscientiousness, extroversion, and openness tend to decrease with age, while neuroticism might increase in older age. Clearly, the question of what happens to personality traits in adulthood is not a simple one to answer. So the consensus regarding change in the 5-factor model dispositional traits with increasing age is the decline of neuroticism and the presence of agreeableness and conscientiousness. And these 3 traits are associated with personality adjustment, especially in terms of becoming emotionally less volatile and more attuned to social demands and social roles. And these characteristics allow older adults to maintain or regain levels of well-being in the face of loss, threats, and challenges, which are common occurrences in later life. So one question that's posed is, how can we understand the evidence showing both stability and change in personality? So there was a researcher, Staudinger, and her colleagues offered a view that combined these two ideas. And they suggest that personality has two aspects, which are adjustment and growth. And personality adjustment involves changes that help individuals function effectively in society and make daily life run smoothly. Personality growth, on the other hand, refers to reaching ideal states like greater wisdom, self-transcendence, and integrity. These two aspects interact as growth depends on successful adjustment. However, Staudinger notes that not everyone experiences growth in these ideal states, leading to the development of adjustment strategies later in life. This framework can help us understand the stability and change observed in the five-factor model of personality. There was another proposal of a model known as the tessera, which stands for triggering situations, expectancy, states, expressions, and reactions. And this model explains that long-term personality development results from repeated short-term experiences. These experiences create a feedback loop that can lead to changes in personality traits and behaviors over time. The differences in these short-term processes among individuals explain why some people experience changes in personality traits while others do not. And this can also clarify why people's life stories differ, which is another topic that we will explore later. So, as we discussed earlier, personality traits are generally stable when we look at averages across large groups of people. However, when we focus on very specific traits in certain individuals, we might see less stability and more change. And so the tessera model pretty much explains this. And so long-term personality development tends to be a product of repeated short-term situational processes. And these short-term processes differ across people. But generally, when you take the average of all of these short-term situations and behaviors, you come up with a long-term personality core trait. And so some people show changes in personality traits while others do not. So and we can see that from the tessera model. These differences can explain why some people experience changes in their traits while others don't. And so people's life stories tend to differ when we look at specific behaviors and personalities. Wagner and colleagues expanded on this idea further by identifying sources of change in personality traits. And so they came up with the integrative source model, which is a more integrative approach to personality. And they point out two main categories. One is genetic and environmental factors, and the other is personal and situational contextual factors. And in the first category, researchers using advanced genetic methods have found that genetics and environment are closely connected. So for example, our environmental influences can change how our genes function and affect gene expression without altering the genes themselves. In the second category, the line between personal and situational factors is blurry because personality is influenced by the situation. So for example, someone that's extroverted knows that appropriate behavior varies between a birthday party and a courtroom. Wagner and colleagues argue that to fully understand personality stability and change, we need an integrated approach that considers all of these factors. So this integrative source approach suggests that a person can be described by stable traits that lead to differences in how they think, feel, strive, and behave. And their genes can influence both these stable traits and changeable situations. Through their thoughts, emotions, motivations, and actions, genes can affect how a person interacts with their environment. And so our environment includes various circumstances that can be stable or they can fluctuate over time. Different external influences can interact with one another and with a person's internal traits. So, for instance, sociocultural contexts can create pressures related to different social roles, such as being a parent, being a partner, or being an employee. And these pressures can affect relationships and everyday tasks, such as dividing household chores. And these sources interact in complicated ways. So, as a result, a person's emotions, motivations, or traits shape how they experience their social roles and relationships. The environment then offers opportunities and challenges that can reinforce or change these personality traits. So, one question that we tend to ask is, how do our perspectives on life change as we move into middle age? And so, using the example in your textbook of Mayuri, a 52-year-old preschool teacher, she reflects on her beliefs about what's important to her now compared to when she was younger. And she explains that she definitely feels differently about what she wants to accomplish. And when she was younger, she wanted to advance and be a great teacher. And now, as she gets older, she's more concerned with helping new teachers around her and sharing her experiences with them. And many people do find that middle age brings a shift in priorities and concerns. And so many people, compared to their younger adult years, start to change in terms of what they prioritize and how they feel and what they are motivated to do. And a lot of people can see this as a natural evolution of perspective. So this raises the question, do our attitudes about what truly matters in life change over time? And so we'll examine the evidence that suggests people's priorities do change throughout adulthood and prompt them to reassess their lives periodically. And this view of personality requires a different lens than the traditional understanding of fixed traits. So instead, we'll take an experiential approach, focusing on individual experiences and interpretations of life as the foundation for understanding personality. Viewing personality holistically means we can't simply break it down into a list of traits. This is similar to understanding intelligence, because intelligence is not just a set of skills, but it is different modes or styles of thinking. And so to truly know someone, it goes just beyond understanding their traits. It involves understanding what matters to them, their desires, how they pursue those desires, their plans, and how they interact with others. And so we need to get a grasp about a person's personal concerns. For example, what they want at different stages of their lives and in various areas. And these personal concerns reveal strategies, plans, and defenses that people use to achieve their goals and avoid what they don't want. Ultimately, personal concerns reflect the source of a person's meaning in life. And so, in terms of what's different about personal concerns, it emphasizes the importance of sociocultural influences on development that shape people's wants and behaviors. And it takes into account a person's developmental context and distinguishes between having traits and doing everyday behaviors. Jung's theory marks a significant shift in psychoanalytic thought. So he was originally a follower of Freud, and he later broke away and created his own ideas that blend Freudian concepts with humanistic psychology. One of his key beliefs was that personality continues to develop in adulthood, which contrasts with Freud's idea that personality development stops in adolescence. He emphasized the importance of balance among all parts of a person's personality. And so each part needs to be expressed, whether through normal behavior, mental health issues, or dreams. He identified two main orientations of the ego, which is extroversion, focusing on the outside world, and introversion, which centers on inner thoughts and feelings. For a person to be psychologically healthy, both orientations need to be present and well balanced. If someone leans too heavily forward towards one of them, they may be seen as an extrovert or an introvert. Jung also proposed two age-related trends in personality development. So first, he noted that younger adults are generally more extroverted because they are building relationships and careers. But as people get older, they often shift towards introversion, which means it's reflecting a desire to explore personal feelings about aging and mortality. The second trend involves what Jung called the feminine and masculine aspects, and he believed that everyone has both. So in young adulthood, many people tend to express one side while hiding the other, often following gender stereotypes. However, as people get older, they start to reveal the parts of their personality they previously suppressed. For example, men might embrace traits they once considered feminine, while women might express traits they viewed as masculine. And this shift helps create a better balance, allowing individuals to meet their personal needs rather than conforming strictly to societal expectations. Jung's ideas about the self and personality being shaped by symbols and stories, as well as transcending dualities like femininity and masculinity, have influenced research on adult development. Erikson was one of the first theorists to create a comprehensive lifespan theory of personality development. And he has 8 stages, and they illustrate the significant challenges that he believed individuals must face throughout their lives. In his theory, each stage of development involves a struggle between two opposing forces, and individuals experience both sides. The names of these stages reflect the conflicts that people face. Resolving these struggles involves both internal psychological factors and external social influences. When people successfully navigate these challenges, they build strengths in certain areas. If they struggle, it can hinder their development and affect future challenges. And so each stage can be seen as a crisis that must be addressed, following the epigenetic principle. And this principle suggests that each psychosocial strength has a specific time when it is particularly important. And the 8 stages show this order. So since these stages are spanning a person's entire life, developing all of these strengths takes time. Erikson emphasized that our present and future behaviors are rooted in our past experiences, meaning that how we resolve each stage impacts the next one. Erikson believed that a healthy personality starts off with a sense of trust. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust. So infants in this stage face a challenge of developing trust in a world that they don't yet understand. And so this is typically bonding with caregivers or bonding with a parent. And depending on how the caregiver responds, the infant can either develop trust or mistrust in the world. The second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt, involves children realizing that they can control their actions, moving from being reactive to acting intentionally. And their desire for independence can clash with their fear of taking responsibility. In the third stage, children begin to explore their identities and the world around them. And so this is the initiative versus guilt stage, where they ask questions and they get engaged in imaginative play. The fourth stage centers on industry versus inferiority, where children seek acceptance from their peers and they work hard to develop skills. If they're successful, that builds confidence, while failure can lead to feelings of inferiority. During adolescence, the challenge shifts to identity versus identity confusion. And this is where teenagers have to choose which identity to adopt from many possibilities. And this involves exploring, interacting with other people, their peers, and trying to identify who they are. And this struggle can lead to confusion if they feel torn between different options. In emerging adulthood, the focus becomes intimacy versus isolation. And this is where young adults form close relationships. And Erickson noted that true intimacy involves sharing oneself fully without losing one's identity. And so if intimacy is not achieved, people may feel feelings of isolation, social withdrawal, or a lack of self-esteem. As individuals enter middle age, they confront generativity versus stagnation. And this stage is about caring for the next generation and contributing to society versus feeling self-absorbed. So embracing this stage leads to a sense of care and connection with others. Whereas failure to achieve generativity can lead to feeling self-absorbed and focused on oneself. In old age, the final struggle is between ego integrity and despair. Older adults reflect on their lives, coming to terms with their choices and experiences. And this stage often involves contemplating mortality while finding meaning in their legacy through family and community connections. Achieving integrity requires accepting a person's life story and their experiences they have gone through. Engaging in a life review can help facilitate this process and support mental health in later life. Erickson's theory has significantly influenced how we think about development throughout life. There are some parts of his theory that are unclear or linked to specific historical beliefs and lead some critics to dismiss it as untestable and incomplete. By examining the main ideas more closely, other theorists have worked to clarify these issues and identify common themes and connecting Erickson's ideas with other theories. So for example, Gilliard suggested that Erickson's theory can be seen as a series of narrative themes in how adults develop their characters. Logan in 1986 viewed Erickson's stages as a repeating cycle, starting from trust, moving to identity, and finally to integrity. In this perspective, development progresses as follows: trust, achievement, and wholeness. Throughout life, we first learn to trust ourselves and others, starting with the early stages of trust versus mistrust and autonomy versus shame and doubt. This idea recurs later when we see close relationships while maintaining our own identities. Logan also highlights the theme of achievement, which is important at different life stages. So in childhood, this is reflected in the stages of initiative versus guilt and industry versus inferiority, while in adulthood, it appears in generativity versus stagnation. Finally, understanding ourselves as a whole and valuable first arises during adolescence and is revisited in old stage. And so in other words, other theorists argue that these stages don't necessarily happen and then dissipate. They can be revisited even in older years. And so it's sort of changing and manifesting constantly. And so what we first find out about ourselves in adolescence can be revisited as we age. And so our identity could change. And our place in society can also change. Logan's analysis suggests that while our psychosocial development seems complex, it may actually revolve around a few core issues. So additionally, these trust issues, trust, achievement, and wholeness, they are not resolved once and for all. So they are challenges that we constantly face throughout our lives. Slaughter builds on these ideas, explaining that the central conflict of generativity versus stagnation involves struggles with pride versus embarrassment, responsibility versus uncertainty, career success versus feelings of inadequacy, and parenthood versus self-focus. Each of these conflicts helps us understand generativity as a connection between society and the human life cycle. Researchers studying emerging adulthood suggest that there might be an extra stage unique to this time in life. Patterson proposed a fifth stage called incarnation versus impotence, which would fit between adolescence and emerging adulthood. So it's really between the identity versus role confusion stage and the intimacy versus isolation stage. And according to Patterson, this stage involves exploring our sexuality, forming various social and intimate relationships, and balancing our independence with dependence. It also includes experimenting with different beliefs and ideologies. Some critics believe that Erikson's focus on struggles suggests that life is always a crisis, and that framing these struggles as two opposing outcomes is too simple. Cotre argues that adult experiences are far more complex, and he points out that adults have many different ways to express generativity, and these do not always lead to a single outcome. Cotre identifies 5 types of generativity. One is biological and parental generativity, which relates to raising children. Technical generativity involves passing on specific skills from one generation to the next. Cultural generativity includes being a mentor to others. Agenic generativity includes the desire to achieve something meaningful that lasts beyond our life. And lastly, communal generativity, which reflects participation in shared relationships and communities. In Erikson's view, a key part of adulthood is the stage of generativity versus stagnation, which has been the focus of a lot of research. McAdams developed a model to explain generativity, highlighting how it arises from the interplay of cultural influences and personal feelings. This desire to create something lasting, like raising children, mentoring others, or sharing knowledge, reflects a concern for the future and leads to positive actions for the next generation. When people resolve this conflict positively, they often feel a sense of purpose and develop a new part of their life story that shapes their identity. McAdams' model connects differently to personality traits. For instance, generative concern is a general interest in caring for younger generations, while generative action refers to the actual behaviors that help them. Generative concern is linked to life satisfaction, but generative action may not always be. So for example, grandparents might feel fulfilled by their grandchildren, but may not want to take on the daily responsibilities of raising them if they have the choice. Overall, research shows that generativity tends to stay stable over time. A study found no change in average generativity among adults in their 40s to late 60s. While generativity can be expressed at any age, certain forms are more common in middle age. For instance, middle-aged adults often focus more on generative themes in their meaningful life experiences and make more commitments to future generations, like saving for their children's education. A key part of generativity is leaving a legacy, which is important for everyone regardless of gender. This can include meaningful work, volunteering, or donating to causes that people care about. Life transition theories are based on the idea that adults go through a series of life transitions or passages. And these theories assume that adulthood consists of alternating periods of stability and change, and that everyone experiences these transitions at the same time, age, or within a narrow range of ages. However, we should be cautious because some life transitions are very popular and there can be a strong social pressure to feel like you're experiencing them or to label your experience as part of these transitions. And so what actually happens may be a combination of expectations and socialization. So factors like social norms, stereotypes, and personal expectations can influence how we interpret these events. The main idea in theories about life transitions is that middle-aged adults often go through a personal crisis that leads to significant changes in how they see themselves. During a midlife crisis, people are expected to reflect deeply on their lives and gain a better understanding of who they are. They confront difficult issues like aging and mortality, which may lead to changes in behavior, and there are many stereotypes about how this looks. Research by Levinson and colleagues suggests that middle-aged people often report feeling intense internal struggles similar to depression. However, many studies have not found strong evidence for a true midlife crisis. And so this suggests that a midlife crisis may be a myth. Those who do experience a crisis might be dealing with broader psychological issues. Despite the midlife crisis being considered a myth, there is plenty of evidence that midlife is an important time in life. Changes during this period affect all areas, including family, work, and social relationships. Midlife involves balancing the gains and losses that come with aging and connects earlier and later stages of life while bridging different generations. So midlife is about managing various roles, changes, opportunities, and challenges. And these aspects occur throughout the stages of adulthood. So from young adulthood to older adulthood, we are constantly reevaluating our opportunities, our changes, roles, and challenges we face. And research shows that people often engage in a period of self-reflection during midlife. And so they're reorganizing their self and their values, and they're undergoing some general cognitive changes. And so there's evidence that our sense of self and values change throughout adulthood. And these changes are more about general cognitive development. So emphasizing cognitive growth is crucial for personal and spiritual reflection. During midlife, many people transition from what Merton and others call the false self, which focuses on achieving externally recognized goals, to the true self, which is defined by personal values and helping other people. And from another viewpoint, Abigail Stewart found that women who regret taking on traditional roles, such as being a wife or a mother, but they later choose to pursue education or careers at midlife, report greater well-being. And she suggests that this adjustment is better seen as a midlife correction, which means individuals reassess their roles and dreams. Additionally, it's important to look at midlife from a cross-cultural perspective. So there is some research that suggests that the concept of midlife is mainly a Western idea. In other cultures, significant life changes are linked to events like marriage or moving into a spouse's family. Major transitions are often defined by events such as children getting married or mother-in-laws taking on a more observational role. And while midlife is a key point for reflection in many cultures, the idea of midlife as a crisis is largely a Western notion. And this highlights the importance of cultural context in understanding adult development. McAdams came up with a life story model, and he says that to understand a person's identity, we can't just look at their traits or personal issues. Identity is more than just a list of qualities or challenges that someone faces. Instead, it's about the life story of who a person is, where they've been, where they're headed, and who they want to become. And so his model suggests that people create a life story that has a beginning, a middle, and an expected ending, which they update throughout adulthood as they grow and face new challenges. This story is also shaped by cultural influences. And McAdams found that people in Western society start forming their life stories during late teens and early adulthood, but these stories have roots in their earliest attachments as babies. The attachment theory helps explain many aspects of personal development, including personality and relationships. According to Erikson's theory, adolescence is when people start to form their identities and life stories. This process continues in early adulthood and evolves further during midlife and later as people experience different life changes. Generativity is about creating a meaningful story that can inspire future generations. So in life stories, a person's changing identity is shown through the emotions expressed. So the most important thing to life stories is this changing personal identity that's reflected in emotions conveyed in our life story. Motivations also evolve when people keep trying to achieve their goals over time. And there's two main themes in these goals. One is agency, which involves power and independence. The other one is communion, which focuses on love and belonging. Life stories reflect a person's beliefs and values, and they provide a context for their actions. Each story has moments that reveal how people see changes and consistencies in their lives. They show they've either changed or stayed the same by pointing to specific events. So every life story needs an ending that allows a person to leave a legacy and inspire new beginnings. For middle-aged and older adults, their stories often focus on giving birth to new generations, which is similar to the idea of generativity. One way to explore life stories is through autobiographical memory. When people share their life stories, they're shaped by both the storyteller and their audience, including important people in their lives, like family and friends. And the shared process of remembering is an example of how identities are formed together. So overall, McAdams sees identity change as a process of creating and reshaping our life story. And our life story is heavily influenced by cultural factors. So our cultural, racial, ethnic, and gender backgrounds shape how we create and revise our life stories. Sometimes these changes are conscious, and other times they happen unconsciously. The goal is always to create a life story that is clear, believable, open to new possibilities, and reflects different sides of a person while fitting within their cultural context. Susan Whitbourne believes that how we think and learn greatly influences how we build our identities. And she came up with the Whitbourne identity theory. And this is arguing that people build conceptions of how their lives should look and proceed. And so she calls this the lifespan construct, which is our unified understanding of our past, present, and future. And several factors shape this lifespan construct, including our identity, values, and cultural background. Our lifespan construct has two main parts. The first part is called the scenario, which includes our expectations that we have for ourselves for the future. This scenario turns important aspects of our identity into a plan for what we want to achieve. It's influenced by social norms that tell us when certain life events should happen, like getting married, starting a career, or having kids. So in simple terms, the scenario acts like a GPS for our lives, helping us navigate our goals. We create a social clock by tagging expected events to certain ages And as we go through life, we're constantly comparing our progress to this plan. If we reach our goals ahead of time, we feel proud, but if we're behind, we might feel disappointed. The second part of the lifespan construct is the life story, which is a personal narrative that organizes our past experiences into a coherent sequence. This life story gives meaning to our events and helps us feel connected to our history. Because we often share our life stories with others, they can become somewhat rehearsed and stylized. As we retell these stories over time, they can become distorted, making them seem more positive or accurate than they were. Whitbourne based her theory on a study of 94 adults ages 24 to 61 who came from diverse backgrounds and life situations. And through these detailed interviews, she identified a process of adult identity development that balances identity with life experiences. And so her model of identity development builds on Piaget's ideas of assimilation and accommodation. She combines concepts from cognitive development with identity growth to explain how identities are formed and changed throughout our lives in adulthood. So assimilation is when people use what they already know about themselves to deal with new situations. If someone relies too much on assimilation, they may resist change. On the other hand, accommodation is when a person adapts their actions based on the situation. While Whitbourne found evidence of life changes, she did not see these transitions happen in a strict stage-like way or tied to specific ages. So instead, she discovered that people tend to go through transitions when they feel it's necessary. And so her model has since included how people adjust to middle age and aging. So key insights from her work include that identity, assimilation, and accommodation change with age. Older adults tend to rely more on identity assimilation, while younger adults are more likely to use identity accommodation. In older adulthood, identity assimilation helps maintain a positive self-image by downplaying negative experiences. In contrast, changes in identity during older adulthood can be linked to poor mental health. Being able to adapt a person's identity to age-related changes while maintaining a positive self-view is essential for successful aging. Hooker and McAdams developed the 6 foci model of personality. And this model combines different parts of personality, like traits and processes, into a framework with 3 levels. The first level consists of traits, which are the stable characteristics of a person. The related process here is states, which are temporary feelings and experiences. So this could be mood, fatigue, or anxiety that can change over time. The second level focuses on personal concerns known as personal action constructs. So these include goals, motivations, desires, and developmental tasks reflecting how we actively engage with our personality. The corresponding process for personal action constructs is self-regulation. And so these include self-regulatory strategies, such as our self-efficacy and sense of control. So if you look at it this way, personal action constructs are based on what you want, and self-regulation is based on what you do. And so these self-regulation processes help determine whether these personal goals are achieved in different areas of our life. The third level is the life story that each person creates to give meaning and purpose to their life. The related process is self-narration, which involves how people change their life stories based on who they are talking to. These levels don't operate in a strict hierarchy, so they all work together at the same time and they are interrelated. So as we've talked about before, a key part of identity in adulthood is how people bring together different aspects of themselves. Many studies have looked at how self-perceptions change with age and how these changes affect behavior. When self-perceptions shift, they often lead to changes in beliefs, concerns, and expectations. One way to understand self-perceptions is through the idea of self-concept. Our self-concept is the organized and coherent way that we see ourselves. And it's a major topic of research in personality, and there's a lot of theories explaining how self-concept develops during childhood and adolescence. Keegan connected the growth of self-concept with cognitive development, and he proposed 6 stages of self-development that align with stages of cognitive growth. And so the first 3 stages are known as incorporative, impulsive, and imperial. And so they match Piaget's early stages of sensory motor, pre-operational, and concrete operational stages. And during these stages, Keegan believes that children evolve from understanding themselves through basic reflexes to recognize their needs and interests. At the start of formal operational thinking in early adolescence, people begin to develop a sense of connection with others. And Keegan calls this the interpersonal stage. By late adolescence or early adulthood, individuals reach a mature identity where they take control of their lives and form their own beliefs. And this is known as the institutional stage. Finally, with advanced thinking, individuals understand that the self is a complex system that includes other people. And this is referred to as the interindividual stage. And so this work highlights that personality development is not isolated. We must view someone as a complex whole. So understanding self-concept or any other part of personality is enhanced by considering how it connects with other areas of development. Gisela Laboviv has also focused on how cognitive and personality development are connected. She believes that the self is formed by combining emotions and thoughts. For Laboviv, a healthy self-concept in adulthood comes from being happy and being able to handle tension and negativity while staying objective. This ability to integrate emotions and thoughts improves from young adulthood to middle age, but then tends to decline in older age. And so through her research on people ages 11 to 85, she found that older adults tend to shift from a less distinct sense of self in young adulthood to a more distinct self-concept in middle age, and then back to a less distinct self in older age. And so young adult representations of the self are poorly differentiated from others or from social conventions and expectations. However, as people approach middle age, their representations of their self are highly differentiated. And then older adult representations become less differentiated. An important finding was that how well people differentiate their self-concept is associated with their cognitive development, which supports Keegan's ideas. In addition to studying how cognitive and emotional development shape the self, researchers also look at other factors that contribute to self-creation throughout adulthood. So, for example, aging stereotypes can significantly impact the self-concept. And research shows that older adults tend to compartmentalize different aspects of their self-concept more than younger or middle-aged adults. When we engage in this kind of speculation, we create what are known as possible selves. Possible selves represent who we could become, who we want to become, and who we fear becoming. These images of potential future selves are influenced by our development context and culture, making them unique to each individual. Our hopes for the future often reflect personal goals, such as seeing ourselves as leaders, being wealthy, or physically fit. Conversely, our fears may include concerns about being alone, getting injured, or facing failure. These possible selves serve as strong motivators. Our actions are often driven by the desire to achieve or avoid these potential identities and to protect our current sense of self. There were a series of studies done by Cross and Marcus and Hooker and colleagues, where participants across different ages were asked to describe their hoped for and feared possible selves. Their responses were categorized into areas like family, personal life, material possessions, relationships, and careers. And there were several interesting age-related differences. So the study showed that emerging adults prioritized family concerns, such as marrying the right person, whereas established adults ranked family concerns lower, focusing more on personal issues such as being more loving. By middle age, family concerns reemerged, with parents wanting to let go of their children, alongside goals related to career success and adapting to age-related changes. For adults over age 60, personal issues came to the forefront again, but with a focus on staying active and healthy for the years ahead. Health-related goals were particularly significant for older adults, influencing both their hopes and fears. Despite health challenges, older adults showed resilience regarding their health-related possible selves. Overall, emerging adults have a range of possible selves and are optimistic about becoming their desired selves while avoiding those they fear. However, as people get older, they find that both the number of possible selves and their confidence in achieving them decline. Older adults are less likely to believe they have control over these outcomes, which may reflect shifts in their motivation, beliefs about personal control, and the need to explore new options. People's sense of spirituality also evolves throughout adulthood. Thomas Merton and Richard Rohr describe this journey as moving from the false self to the true self. The false self is the superficial identity that we often refer to as I, which Merton sees as a kind of prison we need to escape. In contrast, the true self is about finding joy and connection with the essence of the universe at the core of our being. Rohr explains that the false self is based on a self-image that relies on external measures of success, such as job titles, status, and salary. This identity is fragile and often leads to dissatisfaction because it depends on how others define achievement. The false self feels separate from others and fears change. It focuses on following rules and societal expectations. Achieving the true self involves rediscovering the universal wholeness that has always been within us but often is overlooked. The true self embraces uncertainty and finds fulfillment in accepting things as they are and answering deep existential questions. Research shows that many older adults from various backgrounds and countries rely on their religious faith and spirituality more than on family or friends for coping. For some, especially among African Americans, a strong connection to God is seen as essential for handling life's challenges. There is substantial evidence linking spirituality and religious coping to better health outcomes. Older adults generally who are more engaged in their faith experience better physical and mental health. So for example, older Mexican Americans who regularly pray or attend services tend to have greater optimism, better health, and lower mortality rates. Spirituality is also linked to improved psychological well-being and aids recovery after cardiac surgery. Researchers are increasingly studying spiritual support, such as seeking pastoral care and participating in religious activities. Even under significant stress, such as during serious health conditions, those with strong spiritual identities who seek spiritual support report greater well-being and cope better with chronic health issues. So in this chapter, we explored several main ways to understand personality in adulthood, which is considering dispositional traits, personal concerns, and life narratives. Each approach highlights different aspects of personality. And we also looked at how personality is stable enough for us to recognize someone over time, yet flexible enough to allow for changes in how a person sees themselves and their shifting priorities in different life situations. All of these perspectives acknowledge that there is an outgoing interaction between the individual and their sociocultural environment. And so looking at personality traits isn't enough. We also have to include factors like culture, race, ethnicity, and gender. These categories show both self-defined and socially defined aspects that significantly influence a personality and identity. And so to truly understand a person, we need to look at how they bring their life together into a clear story. And the life narrative approach helps us see how people do this. The theories by McAdams and Whitbourne are great starting points for research. One exciting new area is the concept of possible selves, which gives us important insights into how people envision their future. When we combine these ideas with research on personality traits and personal concerns, we gain a deeper understanding of identity and the self. This shows just how complex personality is, which may explain why developing it takes a lifetime.